Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Thank you all for joining us today for our 40th free webinar in our series. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Ahmed Abjarade. I'm one of the N.A.P.S board members here to introduce our two incredible speakers and just to give you all a few different reminders before we go ahead and get started. So this webinar series is presented to our members by the International Association of Peer Supporters, N.A.P.S. Opinions expressed in this webinar series are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect those of N.A.P.S. Thank you again so much for joining us. A few reminders, this webinar is being recorded, and so all of our webinars are available on our N.A.P.S. website. This recording will be up within a few days to a week. And so if you are not comfortable having your name on this, please feel free to either just rename yourself on here or feel free to log out of the webinar and come back in under an anonymous name. Then a reminder to keep yourself muted throughout this conference and to turn off your video cameras. That way there's no interference and there's no background noise. And for you to do that, if you're unsure, on the bottom left corner, you will have an unmute and a closed video icons that you can utilize throughout this webinar. The chat feature is for your use throughout this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to just include them in there. Towards the very end, we will have some time for Q&A, which we'll be taking some of those questions and having the presenter answer them for us. The chat icon is on the bottom of the screen, as you can see from my screen right now. And again, please remain muted throughout the conference, throughout the webinar. If you wanted to send a message directly to an individual, so if you wanted to send it directly to myself and not everybody on here, please feel free to just send it directly to N.A.P.S under the chat. If you're okay with everyone seeing it and you want to interact with all the participants, please feel free to send it to everybody and make those modifications as needed. If you are interested in a certificate for this session, please send an email requesting the quiz for webinar number 40 to membership@inaops.org. After you complete that quiz, we will be able to send you a certificate within 1 to 2 weeks after the receipt of that completed quiz. And just one final reminder before we get started with this webinar, we have announced our theme for this year's conference. It's going to be in San Diego, October 21st to the 23rd, and the theme is Daring to Rise. So hopefully all of you can join us. Registration for the conference will be open around midnight tonight. And so starting tomorrow, you can sign up and register to be a part of the conference this year. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce our two speakers. So I've had the pleasure of working with Amy and Ryan in our youth and young adult peer supporters committee, our N.A.P.S committee. Amy is actually the co-chair of that committee, and Ryan is a member who joined us for last year's conference and was one of our panelists. So without any further ado, Ryan and Amy, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ahmed. And if you could go to the next slide, that would be awesome. So I guess I want to start by welcoming everyone. Thank you for attending this N.A.P.S webinar today, Empowering Youth as Mental Health Peer Specialists. And as Ahmed said, myself, Amy Detmer, and my co-facilitator here, Ryan Tempesco, will be facilitating this webinar session today. I do want to give a big thanks to N.A.P.S again for allowing us to present this webinar today, and also just reiterating what Ahmed had to say about registration opening for the N.A.P.S conference. It's a really great opportunity, and we hope that you're able to register, and then we can see you there come this October. So why don't we start by doing a little bit of an introduction. So my name's Amy Detmer, and I am actually the program manager of Doors to Wellbeing, which is one of the 5 national consumer technical assistance centers. And Doors to Wellbeing is under the umbrella of the Copeland Center for Wellness and Recovery. So I actually work for the Copeland Center and have really been able to find my dream job actually through the work that I get to do. So we're going to talk a little bit today about some of the work that we've done here at the Copeland Center as it relates to youth peer support and what that looks like for us. But I want to share a little bit about why I'm involved in this work. So I became a certified peer specialist in 2011, having my own personal struggles with mental health difficulties at a young age. I actually spent some time, a year to be exact, in a residential treatment facility in the child serving system. So I'm very familiar with what that looked like for my life. And then as an adult, I also, received some services within the adult system. So I'll be able to talk about what youth peer support looks like a little bit based on my own lived experience in that type of way. I do want to say that, my involvement in peer support has been substantially helpful in my transformative recovery. It's really been something that's given me hope, and peer support has helped me to fuel a passion to be able to give back. And some of the ways that I believe I give back based on the experiences that I had is by engaging in different youth initiatives. So as Ahmed said, I have the honor of co-chairing the Youth and Young Adult Peer Support Committee for N.A.P.S. I've also been involved in what you're going to hear about today, which is a youth empowerment curriculum and developing that. I've worked on planning committees for youth conferences and other peer support conferences. So I've really been able to get involved based on some of those passions that I have for peer support and for using those lived experiences that I have. Some of the things personally that I'd like to share that make me my unique self and who I am. I'm originally from Pennsylvania, so a lot of my knowledge around the peer support is around what it looks like in Pennsylvania and their training curriculums. But I've recently moved to Vermont, so I'm now getting a whole new outlook on what the peer community looks like. And if you're familiar at all with either Pennsylvania or Vermont, they're very different systems. So I'm able to bring in some different outlooks on how peer support is delivered in different states and what that looks like. I am also a mom. I'm a new mom of a 5-month-old son. His name's Timber, and my new, pride and joy in life. But I'm also a mama of some animals. I have a parrot and dogs and a cat. So I'm a big animal lover, and I think that's a lot of who makes me who I am. And I'm a lover of the outdoors and nature. I like hiking and kayaking, and I try to, take a mixture of all these things I love, nature, being a mom, peer support, and combining that in everything that I do, fueling the passion that I have. So thanks for letting me share a little bit about me, and I would like to, at this time, hand it over to Ryan so he can introduce himself.
Thanks, Amy. So yeah, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. I am from Virginia. And I first got involved, I think, in this community probably when I was about 18 or 19, and very quickly learned that peer specialist was the route that I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to work mental health, and that was where I found that I fit the most and where I just had the most fun working. So I very quickly got involved and became the youngest certified peer specialist in my state. And then on my route for there, just really quickly learned which end of the spectrum I wanted to work in. I fell in love with the Copeland Center. I fell in love with Doris Being, and started volunteering a lot for them, and on some national councils, not just through them, but on a lot of different national councils for youth, and trying to bring that perspective in everyone's community, as well as back to my own table. And very quickly, like I said, just fell in love with this and really wanted to grow. What is youth peer support? How do we remain involved in this, and how do we have a voice at the table? And if we don't have one, how do we create one? So that's just a little bit about how I got involved. Like Amy said, Doris Being is under the umbrella of the Copeland Center. So I really got to form all the things that I love into one little box and work there. And then just a little bit of outside background for me outside of work. Like Amy mentioned, being a mom to her pets, I am a cat dad who reminds me all the time when I'm gone how much he hates it. And, I'm also a lover of the outdoors. I love hiking. I'm actually creating a garden this year, so that's been a big thing this year, is trying to plan where do I want to put stuff. I also really love poetry and art and art museums, and just going on adventures and trying new things, and seeing where the wind kind of takes me. And that's one thing that I think that like really benefits me in doing this job and this work, is my openness to just any new experiences in general, kind of seeing what's going to come my way and being flexible with what that process might look like. But again, I do want to thank N.A.P.S for allowing us to do this webinar. Thank you, Ahmed, for starting this off and introducing us, and thank you, Amy, for introducing yourself. And I guess we can go to the next slide whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ryan, for that introduction. So we want to give you a little bit of a sneak peek into what we're going to cover in this webinar today. So as you see on this slide, we do have some webinar objectives, and they are to examine at least 3 benefits of peer support for youth and young adults, to gain an understanding into the foundations of youth resiliency, and to learn at least 2 interactive engagement strategies for mental health peer specialists to utilize with youth. So that kind of encompasses overall what this webinar is going to cover, but just as a other brief, agenda preview here, some of the things that we're going to be talking about is peer support as a whole, and then how youth peer support kind of fits into the overall bigger movement of peer support. We're going to talk about what that looks like specifically for youth in this peer movement. And then we're going to dive into something that we developed here at the Copeland Center, which is the Peer Generation Youth Empowerment Training. And we're going to talk about what that looked like, the engagement processes that took place, how that was developed. And that can really be an opportunity for you or the organization that you might work for to kind of adopt some of these ideas and create something that's by youth for youth. And we're going to outline that as we go through the webinar. And then additionally, we are going to talk about the 4 foundations of youth resiliency, which are part of this peer generation youth empowerment training that we're talking about. And if there's time at the end, we'd also like to invite some interactiveness into this webinar. So we're hoping to facilitate some discussion around these foundations of youth resiliency and give everybody an opportunity to participate regardless of what age. So one thing I guess I want to mention before we get into our next slide is just that when we talk about youth or young adults, we really come at the approach where we're not trying to bracket people in ages. There's often times where there's times and places for that. I know that often SAMHSA will define young adults as ages 18 through 30, but there's a lot of different ages across the nation. So when it comes to this particular webinar today, we really try to take the approach that, you can be a person of any age and consider yourself a person young at heart. However, generally when we're talking about youth and young adults, we kind of mean under the age of 30. And you'll see how that shows up as we go throughout this. Next slide then, Ahmed, please. So this slide talks about the benefits of youth-to-youth mental health peer support. And before we get into that, I did want to talk in general about peer support. And I imagine that most of you on this call, getting emails and newsletters from N.A.P.S, knowing what's going on, that you're knowledgeable about what peer support is. But in case you're not, just a general quick overview is, peer supporters are people that have lived experience, especially in the mental health system, but it could be any type of system. And then through that, being able to offer some guidance and some insight based on those lived experiences that we have. Being able to use our own lived experience to inspire hope and offer support to others. And, straight from the N.A.P.S website, peer support providers are people with personal experience of recovery from mental health, substance use, or trauma conditions who receive specialized training and supervision to guide and support others who are experiencing similar mental health, substance use, or trauma issues toward increased wellness. So overall, peer supporters can take on the definition of, many different terms. You'll hear peer counselor, peer recovery coach, recovery support specialist, peer advocate, youth advocate. There's all different types of names to describe what peer workers can do, or have that specific title in your job. And overall, what we're going to be talking about can encompass any of those titles that somebody might hold. But ultimately, like I said, it's about a person identifying being in recovery and promoting that recovery to others, and walking alongside others in that journey, being able to share, based off those lived experiences. So when it comes to youth peer support specifically, we want to talk about this because it means that it's young people providing service to other young people, or at least that's the way we look at it here. And sometimes this is really important because there's specific things about being a young person that looks different between a child serving system and the adult serving system. And when that young person is providing services to another young person, there's a layer of relatability that doesn't always exist when there's, an older person providing that same service to a younger person. And Ryan and I are going to speak to our experiences as it relates to that. For example, I talked about being in a residential treatment facility when I was a young girl, and some of the biggest challenges I had was actually learning how to navigate that adult system, because I knew the child serving system. And when I turned 18, that shifts. And when I was a young person at that age of my life, I didn't actually have a youth peer supporter there helping me learn how to navigate that adult system. So it became very difficult for me because they looked different. When I was younger in the child system, it was a lot of, we're going to tell you how to do it, and this is what you have to do in order to engage in that treatment. And the adult system had a lot more choice than I was used to, and I didn't know how to necessarily operate under that. So, looking back, I think it would have been really helpful to have a youth peer supporter at that time. And luckily, it was only a few years later that I got introduced to peer support as a whole. But that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about trying to get this type of information to people that maybe are going through those transitions from child serving systems to adult systems, because it is very challenging. So that's one of the things that I wanted to share about that. And then I also wanted to mention that just in general, that having mental health lived experience alone does not make someone a peer supporter. But that peer supporters often go through a training or a process that gives us some tools and some guidance on how to walk alongside of others. So that's what we're talking about here too, is that, people have the opportunity to go through some sort of training that gives us guidance on how to help others. And I want to speak, go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I was just going to comment off of what you said about looking back, how beneficial it would have been to have a youth peer supporter. For me, I didn't start receiving services until right after I turned 18, and I was not trusting of adults at all. So I didn't want to talk. I didn't want them to know anything. And so for me, it really would have been beneficial if I had a young person in the room with me to really walk through that process. Someone who was in that age range that I trusted would have gone a long way when I was first starting to go through the system.
Thanks for that, Ryan. So, as you heard from both of us, we both strongly feel that there would have been some big benefits to having access to a youth peer supporter when we were younger as well. So let's just review some of these benefits here that are outlined on this slide. So youth understand youth. We can relate to each other's experiences with mental health. Often we're at that same area in life. Maybe we're transitioning from high school into college, or we're transitioning into our first apartment or the first place that we're living on our own. And those are some big life transitions. So, for youth to youth peer support, being able to navigate and talk about and walk alongside of each other going through those life transitions can be incredibly beneficial. Another benefit is that it prepares youth as the next generational leaders. modeling that it's okay to speak about our unique and individual experiences. I know that, you know, today I'm at a place where I feel comfortable speaking about my experiences, but when I was younger and I was first learning about recovery, I didn't know how to do that. And oftentimes I was told, don't speak about it. You know, that was a bad time of your life. You should shut that door and never talk about it again. And that didn't really work for me because it was part of me, what I went through and what I experienced. So I think that, you know, youth peer support, a benefit of this is really modeling that it is okay to talk about our experiences, no matter how difficult it might have been or unique it might be, that it's okay. And youth to youth peer support offers a place for that stuff to be discussed. It also supports fellow youth in recognizing that we're not alone in our struggles. I know this was a big one for me when I got introduced to peer support because I thought I was alone. I thought that there was nobody else out there that had similar experiences as me. And when I learned about peer support, I realized, wow, there's a whole world of people out there that can relate to what I'm going through and that are actually working on helping others kind of see that light of hope as well. And then finally, youth can model that recovery, wellness, and resiliency are achievable. So young people too can find that light. They can find that hope and walk with others and be the model that we can get there. Oftentimes when I was younger and I would receive certain types of treatment, and it might be from a person that was over the age of 30, I would feel like, oh my goodness, well, you know, you seem like you're doing really well. It's probably going to take me another 15 years to get to that place of feeling like I'm doing well, or at least that's what it felt like when I was younger. But having youth peer supporters helps us know that we can begin wellness at any age. We can begin working on these types of things and moving toward recovery no matter what age, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term thing that it'll take us to get to achieving. So we did just want to mention a little bit more about how youth peer support has occurred throughout this country. So, you know, we have some other key leaders that we know that, you know, have lived in California, in Iowa, in some other states. And we've talked a lot about how, you know, we know that peer support exists for many different populations of people in different ways. But there was a group of young people, quite a few groups of young people that recognized that there was kind of this gap in peer services, that younger folks weren't really getting our needs met as it related to the peer support that was offered, or we were having a hard time finding it being offered to people of our age. So what happened was a lot of young people started getting together in focus groups. We started advocating for being involved in the possibilities of youth peer support being provided. And here we are today, where there are different states out there offering youth peer support. It's actually even offered through the Medicaid system. And in 2013, the Center for Medicaid Medicare Services established a Medicaid benefit for youth peer support. So it does exist, and it is available to states that choose to implement Medicaid billable peer support services. But it does look very different from state to state. So if you are familiar with peer support trainings and how that looks in your state, it might look very different in another state. So for example, one of the cool things that Ryan and I get to be involved with in our work at Doors to Wellbeing is on our website, doorstowellbeing.org, we have a whole database on peer specialists. And you can go on that database and you could look up what are the training requirements in this state, who are some of the people to contact, is there any specialty peer support trainings, and it looks very different, and you could go on there and see that. So it's the same thing with youth peer support. It looks very different from state to state, and there's some states that are already, you know, billing Medicaid for peer support services. Some of those states are Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Michigan, Georgia, Massachusetts, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Oregon, Texas, and New Hampshire. And so for example, with my knowledge in Pennsylvania, in order to become a youth peer supporter, you go through the 2-week peer specialist training that's offered by one of the training vendors in Pennsylvania. And then to become a youth peer specialist, you take an additional 2 or 3 day training to kind of add that to your peer specialist credentials. And then you're a youth peer supporter. In Pennsylvania, it's a relatively new thing. So I do know that that was developed through focus groups where youth were involved, and they were able to get to a place where now this training is actually being implemented. But I'm going to hand it over to Ryan, who's going to talk how it looks a little bit different in some other states, like where he's from in Virginia.
For sure. Thank you, Amy. Like Amy mentioned, some states have a process that you go through, and some states don't. But that does not mean that youth peer support isn't happening. For instance, Youth Move is a really great organization, and they have chapters. So we have a Youth Move Virginia chapter that is really strong. They're very active in the community. And there's a lot of peer support that's going on with these young people, but there's no certification that they have. They haven't gone through a training. They're just, going out there and doing it. And so I think it's very important to recognize that just because your state might not have a certification process doesn't mean that there aren't organizations or programs out there in your state that are doing this work anyways. So yeah, like I said, I've seen it in Virginia very strong. If I go into our the city, I don't know what the word is, the capital of my state or whatever. Richmond is about 2 hours north of me, and there's a huge hub of young people in Richmond that are doing this work. So it's always been a way that I can go refer people to, and they're doing a really great job. So I definitely, like I said, it's very important to recognize that just because there's no certification process in your state doesn't mean that there aren't young people doing the work.
So then that brings us to this next slide, which goes more into detail of the youth-to-youth peer support movement. So, the way I look at this is that, there's this overall peer movement where peer specialists are coming together. They're talking about what we want to see as it relates to the peer workforce, what kind of changes we want to see. That's happening on international levels, on national levels, then within states and in local levels. There's all different ways that that's happening. But within that bigger peer support movement is what we call this youth-to-youth peer support movement, where younger people are stepping up and saying that we want our voices heard in things that involve youth peer support. Very similar to the way that I think a lot of peer supporters have said, we don't want states making decisions about peer support without our voice being heard. It's very similar. Young people don't want decisions being made about youth peer support and what that looks like unless we also have a seat in the table to have our voice be heard. So that's what this is about, is how do we get our voices heard within this movement, and what can this look like so that youth are involved in this process? And Ryan and I are just kind of going to go through and read these bullet points, talk about them a little bit, and share our experiences as we read through. So the first one here you see is empowering young leaders. And when I hear this, to me, this means things like offering youth leadership opportunities, offering opportunity for professional growth, for personal growth. Anytime we get those sense of empowerment, trying to create environments where young leaders also have that opportunity to feel empowered. Some examples of leadership opportunities are things like, is there a spot for a young person to be a keynote speaker, or for a youth panel to occur where youth voice gets to be heard within the work? Ryan, thoughts about that one?
I definitely think even just funding young leaders. I know there's been times where I found it really empowering when there was something coming up that I wanted to go to, but it didn't have the funding. Say I wanted to go to a youth peer specialist training if I was in a state that had that. But I'm young, I'm in college, I don't have the money for that. If someone were to fund me to go there, I feel like that would be very empowering. So just knowing that people are out there actually backing you, not just with their words, but with their actual funding, I think is very important when I think of how it is to empower young leaders.
And then that leads us to our next bullet point here, which is establishing youth networks. And when I think of this, I think of things like offering opportunity for youth networking, whether that be, you know, at a bigger, you know, like at the N.A.P.S conference, there might be opportunity for youth networking specifically there. Or maybe there's a specific youth conference that's going on, where youth have the opportunity to get to know other people and really feel that sense of unity in this work that we're doing. And, you know, just as another thought here, one of the things that I know as the co-chair of the Youth and Young Adult Peer Support Committee for N.A.P.S is we're actually going to be launching in the next few months a youth-specific peer support networking call. So N.A.P.S recently started doing a peer support networking and then a peer supervisory networking call. We're actually going to try to implement a youth networking one for this purpose of helping the youth-to-youth peer support movement. Then the next bullet point describes the development of new youth councils, committees, and focus groups. This is another really good opportunity for young people to get involved, to play a big role in advocacy for youth peer support. And Ryan and I are going to highlight some of our journey of youth councils once we get through these bullet points. The next one talks about being developed by youth, facilitated by youth, for youth audiences. So this is one that we're really big on here at the Copeland Center, that when we're offering that youth-to-youth peer support, whether it's one-on-one or it's in a training type of setting, that there's young facilitators. I'm sure many of you know the Copeland Center for RAP, or the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. And one of the things that we try to do anytime we're doing youth RAP, for example, is that there's youth facilitators in the front of the room when we're in a group that's primarily young people, because we think it helps create that movement and that balance from youth to youth work.
Yeah, and another example here is over the summer, Dorstwell being decided that, you know, we wanted to hold a national youth mental health convergence. But we wanted to really draw the young people in. So who are we going to get to plan this? Young people. So what we did was we created a dream team with 4 transition age youth, and they pretty much were in charge of the entire planning of the convergence, down to what do we want to be included, how are we going to outreach to these individuals. Every single detail that went into the convergence came through the dream team. And I think that was very empowering for them, because now they know how to put together an event of that scale. But also it was really cool for like the young people to come and say, wow, like this was put together for me by other people like me. It was not put together by a group of adults that just wanted to target young people. And so again, that was a really great example of a like developed by youth, facilitated by youth, for youth audiences.
And I think that brings us right into the next bullet point here, which is about bringing new innovative ideas into discussion. So, you know, like Ryan was talking about this youth mental health conference that took place, that was really an opportunity for young people to get involved, for us to bring our innovation into a really awesome conference that was offered, and letting young people be the decision makers. It looks very different than just having a young person sit on a committee with, you know, other people and having a voice, because it was fully implemented by youth. So that's one example, as Ryan said. And then, you know, the other thing about this movement is that it gives opportunity for focus on youth-specific challenges. You imagine what that planning committee looked like last year when we were planning that conference. That's all that was brought up, was these youth-specific things, because we were a group of young people making these efforts together. And then, you know, finally, what we believe that this youth-to-youth peer support movement is about is having continuous mentoring opportunities provided. So as another sneak peek, just so you all know, soon to come, we are trying to do a N.A.P.S mentoring program. If you attended the last N.A.P.S conference, there was talk about this in Florida last December, I'm sorry. And that's something that we're going to be launching here relatively soon. So, having continuous mentoring opportunities. And we'll talk about what that looks like a little bit. So mentoring can be something that I kind of view it as peer support on the job. So if I'm having questions about how to be a better peer supporter or an approach to take, I can go to a mentor and I can get some feedback, some guidance on what has worked for that specific mentor. Or vice versa. Maybe my mentor has some questions for me around how I've done things from a fresh, new, innovative type of perspective, and I'm able to also share that. So it becomes a mutual mentoring type of relationship. But we really believe that these continuous mentoring opportunities allow for the success of this youth peer support movement within the overall peer support movement.
Yeah, and I agree with you about the importance of mentoring. And like I mentioned earlier, the national convergence that we did, the Dream Team did have adult mentors. So we did have adult mentors who have put together events of this scale that we were able to go back to and say, hey, I have a question about how this works or how this works. And they were able to sit down with us and have those discussions. And if it wasn't for them, we would have been lost somewhere along the way. So it's very important to have those, but also to know that it's a continuous cycle. I've had a lot of mentors over the years, some bigger mentors than others. And I had one mentor, I think I said, she left and I said, what am I supposed to do? Like, you're my mentor. And her response was, well, now you're someone else's mentor. And so remembering that, we receive mentoring, but then we also give it back. And that it should be a continuous cycle that's done over and over again. And that's how this movement continues to grow.
Ryan, I think those are some really important highlights there that you're mentioning. And I just wanted to share a little bit about how I've been involved in this movement kind of based on some of these bullet points. So, one of the first things I did as a youth peer support advocate was I got involved in a youth council. And it was a youth council with the Copeland Center. So, it was really cool because for me, it was a national youth council that I got to, fulfill that networking need I had to meet other young people doing similar work that had similar passions. And then it was through that council that I got the invitation to show up at a youth focus group, where again, this was an opportunity that it was developed by youth, facilitated by youth, and for youth audiences. So I got to be, fully a part of something like that. And it really helped me feel like my voice mattered as a young person and that I was doing more than just speaking about recovery for all people, but I was speaking about recovery specifically for young people, which was close to my heart as a young person. And then through that process, it was actually, I was able to find employment and to get an opportunity to actually get paid to work on some youth initiatives. So, kind of just a story of how getting involved in this youth movement can really help us be able to give back if that's what we're looking to do.
Definitely, I agree. I have a similar story to yours, except for I sat on a few state boards and advisory councils before I met you on the national council. And then I think our stories are pretty similar from there on out with getting involved in different focus groups and projects, and then that leading to employment.
So then, Ahmed, if we could go to the next slide.
So I just want to read a little bit about our peer generation youth empowerment training, and then I'll let Amy explain a little bit about this training in particular. So this training was developed by the Copeland Center for Wellness and Recovery, and this was special because it was developed by youth for youth, and it's only facilitated by youth for youth. So it's a really great atmosphere that you don't find in any other training because everything down to the curriculum was by youth, and then the facilitators that walk into the room are youth. And it's a 3-day training curriculum, unlike the 5-day trainings that a lot of us have attended in the past. So our learning objectives for this one is that participants will gain an understanding of the foundations of resiliency, which we'll touch base on. And then participants will learn practical ways to participate in community honoring differences in intersecting identities. And then also the last one is participants will develop clear self-identified strategies for wellness and resiliency. So I'll hand it over to you, Amy, to kind of explain a little bit more about this.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. So Ryan and I are going to talk about our involvement in the development of this, but I want to just talk overall about what this training means to me and how this is a training that does empower youth to make a choice whether or not becoming a youth peer specialist is something that they'd be interested in. So I really think that this youth empowerment training is about that. It's about finding that youth empowerment from within and helping people get reconnected to ourselves so that we can engage on that personal journey of recovery or wellness or personal transformation, so that we are able to use our own experience to give back and support others. So this is a training that is kind of an introduction to the peer movement, an introduction to our abilities to be natural peer supporters, and helps people identify not specifically how you'd provide peer support within that specific state or within a specific program, but overall, how can you naturally offer that to others within your community? And I think that that's really important because I think about, I've been a peer supporter since 2011, and peer support is something that is becoming more accessible, and more people in general in the community are becoming aware of what peer support is and that it exists and that it's available to folks. However, I think that there's often times where I'll be out in the community and I'll have a conversation with somebody that's not part of this peer support community, and they don't have any idea what I'm talking about when I mean mental health peer supporters. So it's kind of similar that, there will be people sometimes that go through this training that aren't really familiar with that. So it's an introduction to what is peer support, that there's other young people out there inviting folks into a process like this, talking about our recovery, talking about what helps us stay well, and all of that type of stuff. And then at the same time, encourages people to figure out in their own way how and if they want to take action in being a peer support within their community. And then if we can go to the next slide, Ahmed, we're going to just start highlighting a little bit about this particular training.
Thanks. So this is the picture. This was the first group of the pilot for the peer generation training we did. And this was just a really amazing experience for both Amy and myself, because we spent all this time, being a part in the development of this curriculum, all the different focus groups, all the hard work that went into it. And this was our first training. And so we walked in not knowing what was going to work, if any of it was going to work, if we were going to have to come back and rewrite the whole thing. And so we walked in day one, and it was just actually beautiful. Like the first hour of this, everything just unfolded, and we realized that this is exactly what was needed. And throughout the course of the 3 days, we really got to know these people as individuals, and some background information on these individuals. A lot of them, most of this group, I think all but maybe two, have seen a friend get shot and killed in their lifetime. A lot of them had been involved in drugs and gang life. So when we found out some of their stories, it was just one of those things that you really connected with. And on the end of the day 3, we had responses like, one of them was crying, saying she didn't want this to end. One individual said that he got more out of the 3 days of this training than he did out of years of therapy. And it was just one of those things that we really soaked in as much as we could with this group. And that's when we determined that it was best to move forward.
And just to add to that, I think for me, what I found to be so profound about this experience is that a lot of the feedback that we got was that for the first time, folks were offered an environment that was mutual and that was strengths-based and that allowed us to explore life for ourselves rather than being told, this is what we have to do, or this is how, you'll heal from this time. It was a safe space for us to talk about this stuff and come together. And it really was a profound experience where many of these folks left saying, I want to stay involved in this community and I want to help and give back too. So it was that first light of, oh my goodness, there's hope for our younger generation. And, you know, I might want to become a peer specialist too, because I think I can give back based on what I've experienced in life. And then next slide, Ahmed. So we said that one of the things we'd cover in this webinar was interactive youth engagement strategies. So we did want to talk about some of these interactive strategies that we've used specifically in this peer generation training, but we've also, you know, do this in any of the youth work that we do. So when we had this conference last year that Ryan was talking about with the Dream Team, we still kept these engagement strategies in mind. And I think that being able to bring in these types of engagement strategies, not just in group settings, but if you're supporting people one-on-one as well, are often really helpful. So this is things like speaking youth language and current trends, you know, being able to meet us where we're at with you know, technology and talking and texting and emojis and memes and things like that. Those are really big. So being able to kind of speak that youth language, trying to create a colorful space, especially in a group setting. We've got a lot of feedback that makes all the difference in creating that space where people feel comfortable and energized and want to open up and share with each other. Maybe during opportunities where it works out to have some music there, whether that, you know, might be on the break of a training, or maybe if you're doing one-on-one peer support, just offering that time for music to be a part of that, I think is really helpful, especially for me as a young person, to want to engage in what it is that I'm participating in. I think having an opportunity for icebreakers. So in a group setting, you know, being able to bring that in where everybody gets to participate, maybe in a one-on-one setting, it's just asking more of those open-ended questions. You know, being able to do silly things to get to know each other as it's a mutual relationship of peer support. And then, you know, also through these engagement opportunities, adding chances for leadership. So, you know, what kind of opportunities do you know of that maybe you want to share with other young people? And then again, the mentoring opportunities, you know, being able to help people identify who are your mentors. What do you want to get out of mentoring? Are you interested in having a mentor in your life? Different things like that. And ultimately keeping fun in mind. I think that for young people, that's something that's really important to us is, you know, are we having fun in what we do? And I think that there's ways to support people on a healing recovery journey and still have fun doing it. So, you know, when you're thinking about the way that you engage others or you engage yourself in the process, are you having fun at the same time? And thinking outside of the box when it comes to these types of engagement strategies. And then, yep, thanks, Simon.
So this is an example of what some of our rooms look like sometimes. We like to throw color around. That you can see that if we write something, we leave it on the wall. And make sure we have lots of fidgets on the table, things that people can grab if they want to fidget with something in their hands, and just having a variety of things for people to choose from. And you can just go to the next slide. This is another example of an activity that we do. And as you can see, we just provide a lot of creative freedom. You see different sizes of paper, you see different styles of how they decided to put this information together. We left it up to them to do this in a way that was going to work best for them and was going to mean the most to them. And it really brings the creativity alive. We've seen some really creative works over the time of doing this, and stuff that we wouldn't have even thought about. So we prefer to just do it this way, and it's been great. You can go to the next slide. And this is an example of one of the activities we do around connection. So we have questions like, where do we find connection in our lives, and what connections in our lives are most meaningful to us, and some other ones there. And they write responses on little pieces of paper, and we actually string them together and we create what we call connection quilt. And this is one of my favorite activities. I actually have the original connection quilt from our pilots. I still have it. It was like the thing that I wanted to bring home. This is one of my favorite activities every time we do it, just to see all the connection come alive. You can go to the next one. And this is another activity we do. Just involves standing up. That way everyone's not sitting in their chairs. This activity is actually around strengths and identifying strengths within ourselves. But again, it's just really good to get everyone standing up, getting everyone moving. We find that if they sit in their chairs all day long, people start to really get antsy. And so this is a way for us to say, hey, let's stand up, let's do this activity on our feet. So this is about the development process of peer generation. And Amy and I will both share a little bit about our experience developing this. But it started off, we were both on the National Youth Advisory Council, and that's where this came across. And it was the decision to say, hey, let's create focus groups around this. Projects, let's break up, everyone take a topic, and we'll come together back at our monthly meetings, and we'll bring this information to the group, reassess where we need to go, and then during the next month, continue in our focus groups. So that process took quite a few months, and we kind of created a core leadership team in doing so. And we also had an adult mentor on our team who had been a part of writing curriculums before and was able to kind of walk through that process with us if we had any questions, and really making sure that it was going to be a solid curriculum. And then what we did was we got an opportunity to go pilot it. And this is where it was just a very interesting time because Amy and I were on the road together and we knew that this pilot was coming up. So we were trying to get everything finalized and trying to get like a manual for ourselves written up in a way that was going to be beneficial for us in the room to remember what was coming up, to do it properly, and to really hold up the fidelity of this curriculum that this group had created. And it was just a lot of long nights, of course. We were actually staying in a hotel that had a like life-size chessboard in the lobby. And I remember we were working on this curriculum till like 2 a.m. and we were like, we need a chess break. And, we were out there playing chess and like really kind of having these conversations out loud of where do we see this going? And it was just a lot of long nights in a row. But it was a beautiful process to really see it all come together those last final days before showing up for this pilot. And then it's also an evolving curriculum, so we are consistently making updates to it. Every time we go facilitate this, we do ask for suggestions of what do you think could make this better, or is there anything in here that doesn't work? And that allows us to make sure that we are continuing to make sure that this curriculum is what young people need. And Amy, if you want to add anything about your development process.
Yeah, so, I guess first I really think that this is something that is a model or can be an example of, if you're thinking about implementing some kind of youth peer support program, of how youth can be involved in those implementation efforts. So, Ryan, you highlighted a little bit of what your journey was like participating in that. And my journey looked a little bit different because for me, we really wanted to get to a place where we had a direction for this curriculum. And as Ryan highlighted, we got there. But it was developing youth leadership teams and trying to find out, who was actually interested in being a part of that process, and trying to set up regular meetings so that we were able to work in pairs in some areas of the development. We were able to work as a whole group in other pairs. We were able to gather the collective wisdom and consensus of the entire group of the directions that we wanted to go with this curriculum. So, us as young people, an entire team of people under 30, plus like 2 adult mentors guiding the process a little bit, were able to create and develop and move forward with innovation and ask questions to those mentors when we needed some support. And as Ryan said, the program piloting, going out there and actually doing the work. It was really quite exciting, but really nerve-wracking the first time we went out there and did this, because it was something that, others noticed the importance of giving youth leadership, and they did that. They gave us the opportunity for leadership, and we went out and we implemented something that we created. And it turned out to be probably one of the most amazing experiences in my career thus far, because of the feedback and the way the young people were able to say this impacted their life. And as Ryan said, you know, we have an evolving curriculum, because every time we get to go out and we get to work with other young people, their feedback and thoughts and voice is also super important, that we're able to incorporate that. So, you know, going into this with, you know, it's not just our thoughts, but we're still going out and embracing the voice of young people, what we're hearing, and we're sharing that with the rest of the communities that we get to go and be a part of. So it's just been a really incredible process. And I hope that you're able to maybe learn from what we did as a strategy here, and try that out in an organization or a program that you'd like to have some youth leadership and involvement in. And then next slide, Ahmed. So I do recognize that, you know, we are almost at that time. We do want to have a little bit of room for questions. And I don't think that we're going to be able to get into some of the interactive questions. So I'll just throw them out there for folks to think on your own time and reflect around this stuff. But in this Peer Generation Youth Empowerment curriculum, we do identify 4 foundations of youth resiliency. And you know, this was something that was created within those work groups, and the 4 foundations are hope, connection, self-determination, and meaning. And we define this as resiliency as an action of self-determination inspired by hope and strengthened through connection, which fosters a meaningful life. And one of the things that we found most powerful about the peer generation trainings that we've gone out there and done is that people find that maybe for the first time they're being asked questions about how these foundations show up in their life, and not being told, you know, how it should show up, but allowing us that self-exploration. So some of the questions that we were going to ask for interactive involvement in the webinar are things like, where do you find hope in your life? For me, it's hearing stories of hope and overcoming challenges. For connection, it's questions like, what do we feel most connected to within our life? What gives us that sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves? For me, it's things like nature. And then self-determination is the next foundation of resiliency here, which is one of the questions that we ask is, what's something that gives you a sense of self-determination? When I think about that for myself, I think about my dreams and my goals. And a mantra that I use in my head a lot, which is, it works for me, and it's go big or go home. So I say that in my head, and for me, that helps me feel a sense of self-determination and what I want to accomplish. And then meaning, one of the questions is, what's important to us? Starting to explore that for ourselves and figuring out, yeah, what actually matters to me. And for me, I think about the things that I'm passionate about, like animals and being a mom, and spreading the belief that recovery and wellness is possible for every person. So we really try to explore those types of things in the curriculum with folks, and outside of the curriculum as well. Ryan, anything to add to that one?
No, I think you covered it well.
Yeah, sorry, I took it away because we were kind of running out of time here. So I guess with that being said, we are nearing our end, and we really want to again thank N.A.P.S and thank you all for attending our webinar today. If you'd like more information about, you know, specific questions about youth peer support, Ryan and I will do our best to get those answered for you. If you'd also like some information about the Peer Generation Youth Empowerment Training, feel free to reach out to either of us, and we'll be able to connect with you around that. And again, I want to thank N.A.P.S for being a platform for this webinar today, and for all of the amazing work that you're doing internationally to support the peer support workforce. And Ahmed, if there's any time for questions, I guess we could take a couple. If not, I'm sorry. Please email them to us and we'll try to get back to you.
Yeah, well, Amy and Ryan, thank you both so much for sharing all of your experiences with us. And I know how much work it is put into development of programs and everything. So thank you so much for sharing all of that information. And I know for me personally, the takeaway that I usually get is kind of that reminder of that no matter how much we know about a specific age group or a specific challenge or anything like that, there's always so much that we can learn. So even just hearing the two of you sharing a little bit about your own experiences with the differences between like the youth system versus the adult system was definitely eye-opening for me. And like I said, it's always a reminder of just how much more there is to learn and how quickly we kind of age out of certain age groups. And yeah, literally everything that you both mentioned. Thank you so much for all of that. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. However, like Amy mentioned, feel free to send questions to Amy and Ryan. Feel free to reach out to the N.A.P.S committee as well if you wanted to have any follow-up conversations or anything like that. But again, thank you both Amy and Ryan for this incredible presentation. I know I definitely took a lot away from it, and I'm 26 and I do this kind of work. So hopefully everybody here got as much of it, if not more, from it as I did. Thank you everybody who's here with us. And again, just a quick reminder, right, for certificates, please email, and this says webinar number 39, but please email requesting a quiz for webinar number 40 to membership@inaops.org. And then afterwards, you will receive your certificate. And again, conference registration opens up tonight for our conference in October in San Diego. So hopefully we'll see you all there. And we're really hoping to continue this conversation and really expand on it in terms of youth peer support and what that actually means and how do we really move forward at that conference. So please feel free to join us. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amy and Ryan. And we'll see you all during next month's webinar.